Alrighty, welcome stargazers. So we now have officially a verifiable time given to us through the media from law enforcement. So we have something to more accurate to work with to build a chart rather than a guesstimated sometime before sunrise time. Now, and all that information is on the next chart. So this is the chart work for Vance Boelter. He is the political assassin in Minnesota who is now on the run. Some interesting things that are happening with this case. One, we've just discovered because the FBI likes to, career FBI people, not Patel and whatever the idiot is that are in charge of the FBI now. But the career FBI people are really good about, and law enforcement really about releasing information in drips and drabs. So we're just now getting little pieces of information now. Apparently, he showed up at the houses to commit the murders wearing a latex mask, a realistic latex mask. Now, we don't know if this was custom made or if this is just a latex mask you could pick up at any of the Halloween stores. But he was, in fact, wearing a mask as it was caught on the surveillance cameras. The other thing is that inexplicably, they are looking in the direction of South Dakota for a possible escape destination for him. They have not told us why, and certainly they don't have to. But it's interesting because I'm not an assassin, but if I were going to escape, I would probably head to, I don't know, Canada, right? Even though Canada's got increased checkpoints and a lot more stringent policing of the border to keep the Americans very, very documented as they're going in and out. And by the way, in case you didn't know, that is apparently in response to potential issues in the future because of our abortion situation here and reproductive rights here, and criminalizing it, that the Canadians try to stay out of trouble. So one of the things that they're doing is they're making sure they know exactly who's crossing the border and for what reasons, especially if you're a woman. Not a problem yet, but it could be in the future. So they're trying to be proactive about it, which is going to make it difficult to escape to Canada if that's what you're in fact doing. But why South Dakota of all places, right? So my feeling is, and I don't know, and by the way, it's notable that South Dakota is also the same state to produce Christy Nome. So I don't know what's in the water out there, but there's something that he said about the South Dakota culture. And I think there's a bunch of biker outlaws as well that really have a yen, like a real personal affection for South Dakota. It's Outlaw County or something. I don't know. You won't catch me out there, but there you go. So I'm wondering, because I know in the Dakotas there's typically a lot of money that flows through there because people with money love, isolated places, mountaintops, islands, anywhere that they can feel like they are above it all and away from everyone. Oh, please get those people away from me. And South Dakota is pretty huge and sparse, lots of ranches and stuff, that I do know. So it's not unthinkable that we've got some major money flowing through there and also private jets, and airplanes. So he may be heading to, I'm guessing, but it seems like he may be heading to South Dakota because he's going to meet someone who's going to put him on a plane and fly him across borders to somewhere else, put him safely out of reach. And I say this because I think this guy has been paid to do this. But we'll take a look at the chart and I'll tell you how we came to this conclusion. And again, we're speculating. Law enforcement knows more than we do, but now that we have an actual time to work with that's been verified, we can start putting together some puzzle pieces and see what we come up with on our end. Okay, so the chart that we're using is based on time that's been released by the media from law enforcement, and that is on June 14th, 2025, in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, for those of you who want to set the chart up at home. The time that the police officers encountered Boelter, literally as he was leaving the house after the shooting, at which point because he was not expecting that, they startled him and he took off on foot. He left on foot and ran, leaving the SUV he was driving behind in the driveway. That occurred at 3:35 a.m. And of course, the police for a moment weren't completely sure what was going on or who this person was, because clearly he was wearing a police uniform. So I'm sure for a brief second they thought that maybe he was one of theirs. Until they walked in and saw the dead bodies. And he killed the dog. Like, what the hell's wrong with people? Anyway, so that's the chart we're using. Now, with this chart, I'm using a different program because my PowerPoint's down. On the far left side, circled in green, is the ascendant. 19 Taurus rises on the chart, which makes Venus the chart ruler. Now, as we said before, we usually, or I am always taking the ascendant as the person who initiates the action. And the more important action here is not that the police officer showed up, but that a murder was committed. I mean, in terms of events, the murder is much bigger and notable than police showing up at the house. So, with that said, we're going to assume that this 19 degrees Taurus ascendant symbolizes Boelter. And with that said, he has Venus as his chart ruler. Venus is in Taurus in the 12th house, which also describes what we're seeing, which would be somebody who's operating behind the scenes, under the cover of darkness or disguise, trying to do things he doesn't want other people to know about. And that kind of describes what we're dealing with right now. So if you draw a straight line to the right and circled in yellow, is the 7th house, the descendant, which in this case would be the victims, right? So the victims would be ruled by 19 Scorpio. There's a fixed star here called Zubin, I think it's El Shamali. It's Zubin El Janubi or Zubin El Shamali. There's two fixed stars around 19 degrees. They separate by a good bit now. The one at 19 degrees is the more benefic fixed star and symbolizes honors and recognition in lifetime, which makes sense given that these were high-profile citizens that were murdered, right? I mean, they're politicians, but they're compared to the rest of us lay people, they're high-profile citizens and certainly have received honors and recognition, or they wouldn't be in such an elevated status for a profession that we all recognize, okay? Now, the ruler for the 7th house would be Mars, if you're using traditional rulers, and you follow that yellow arrow down to the bottom of the chart, you'll see it pointing to Mars at 28 Leo. Now, Mars is in wide conjunction with the fixed star Regalis, because Regalis technically right now is at 0 Virgo, but because I think the northern longitude or latitude, it's showing up as a conjunction by a degree or so. So, and of course, Regalis, which is the one everybody loves to justify using Leo rising as Trump's birth chart, has a lot to do with elevations in status, kings and royalty, people who are above others in terms of their status, people who are lawmakers, policymakers, because that's what kings were at one point in life, lawmakers and policymakers, which also makes sense and describes what we're seeing with these particular individuals because they were in fact policymakers, lawmakers. So I'm going to say that using the 1st and 7th house in this way, the 1st house being Boelter and the 7th house being his victims, I think fits. I think this is a good fit. Now, the other thing we're going to look at in this chart is the moon. So if you look at the very top of this chart and that big, thick red line circling it, we have the moon at 28 Capricorn moving into a conjunction with Pluto. Now, the moon in a Harari chart or an event chart, or pretty much every chart other than a natal chart, your personal birth chart, everything except your personal birth chart, the moon represents many, many things, but one of the things it also represents are the sequence of events as we can expect them to occur. It also describes the momentum something has behind it and how long we can expect something to continue forward. One of the big rules in astrology is we don't use void of course moons. Well, except in very, very specific circumstances. And the reason, or first, the description of a void of course moon is the moon being in the very, very last degrees of a sign. In this case, 28 degrees, 42 minutes. There's literally only a minute and so, 1 degree and so many minutes before the moon changes signs into Aquarius. The moon cannot be in the last degrees of a sign, and it cannot be in approaching aspect to anything. So here's where things get a little weird. If you use the modern planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, the moon is not void of course. Okay, the moon is actually applying to Uranus at 28 degrees, 51 minutes. So it's just about to walk off the cliff, and then that's going to be the end of the matter. There's nowhere to go with this. But as of right now, if we use modern planet, it's still within minutes of an applying degree, which means there's still one more turn of events that's possible before this scenario is over. Now, the fact that it is trining Uranus, and Uranus rules explosives, right? Things that go boom, explosive, shotgun, things that explode, and bullets explode, and also unexpected, sudden, jarring events, is not something we're real happy about hearing. Also, too, the Uranus is in the 1st house of Boelter's position, because we're using him as the first house as him, and Uranus sits in his first house representing him. So that moon, that last aspect the moon makes, will be a trine Uranus in his first house, which suggests that this matter will come to a very, very sudden conclusion. And that will be the end of it. Now, also, what's interesting, if you go back to the moon in that big, thick red circle, the moon is applying to Pluto. Okay? So the moon, and it's close. So some people might say that it's not void, of course, because the moon's just close enough to Pluto that they're actually making an aspect, even though it's different signs. But that's a whole other conversation for another day. In this particular instance, what I want you to consider is the possibility, and the thing about it is Pluto, among the many things that Pluto also represents, not that many, but plenty, one of the things that absolutely is consistent with Pluto is betrayal. Okay, so when you have strong Pluto in a chart, typically it's not just big money, big power, but it's also betrayal. That shows up as a theme involved in whatever is described by the Pluto events or the Pluto chart, okay? With the moon applying to Pluto, which is a planet that absolutely always symbolizes betrayal, and making a trine that Uranus in his first house, which rules sudden endings and explosions, right? Things that go boom. I would not be surprised if he ended up taking his own life or ended up getting shot before any truths could be revealed. So I hate to say it, but I think this guy's being set up. Which, it's not unthinkable or difficult to do these days because so many people are so on edge and so fragile. It's really easy. It's really easy to get people to sign up to think that they're being a hero and championing some important cause, when really, they're just being used as a scapegoat, like that poor kid, the delusional kid who got up on top of that garage roof, and tried to point a gun at Trump's head and missed and hit the firefighter behind him in the audience. Yeah, that's a whole conversation by itself also, because, nobody saw that getting up there and broad day. Anyway, just saying. So in this particular case, we're already looking at a picture that really honestly kind of describes somebody who is being betrayed or will be betrayed before this is over, and suddenly and abruptly brought to an end so that nothing gets revealed, right? And I say that also too because that moon is in those late degrees of Capricorn, and Capricorn is a business sign. So there's also some suggestion that there's some transactional history here. This was not necessarily driven, and here's the thing that I think is important, right? Moon in Capricorn, and also the Venus in Taurus and 12th house, this is not necessarily someone who is driven by personal, belief systems. It's not like these wackadoodles, sociopaths who run around bombing clinics, or parades and stuff like that. Like this is much more calculated. And even though his personal sympathies and politics and values may align with, these types of extremist views of the world, I think in this particular case, the turning point, right, the switch that flipped had a lot to do with someone assisting with this. So being seduced into, rising up to be the champion. This is something we need you to do. It's very important. I could be wrong. It sounds a lot like conspiracy theory stuff. But, right now we're speculating and we're trying to find explanations. All right, so let's take a look at the next chart. Now, some other things I just want to take a quick look at. So looking at the moon inside that big, thick red circle, the last aspect the moon makes, because the last aspect the moon makes also represents the most recent activity or action that was taken. With that moon, the last aspect that was made was a quincunx to Mars at 28 degrees 20 minutes in Leo. Okay, so it would suggest, and of course, Moon and Mars has a lot to do with, explosions and tempers, right? Emotional outbursts. So that Moon-Mars quincunx suggests that something did not go according to plan, which is pretty interesting considering everything else seems to be very, very well coordinated and planned out. But there was a mistake that was made and a recalculation of strategies that need to be done in a hurry, which would make sense if the police showed up at the door unexpectedly. I'm certain that was not something he had planned on or planned for. Okay, so with that said, now the other thing I want to point out is that with all these planets at the 28th degree, right, which means that it's 2 degrees or less away from changing signs, this represents a very, very short window for this to come to completion. So in the original video short that I did using a Harari, I thought that it was possible he may have been found within 4 to 6 hours after the event occurred. Clearly that has not happened. He's still on the run. And also, too, we were working with Harari, with all the caveats to go there, blah, blah, blah. But this is the time of the event itself. And still we're seeing this is a very short window. So with less than 2 degrees to work with here before the moon completely changes signs, I would expect if we use a degree for a day, in less than 2 days, which is still really fast. He's not getting very far. And they're going to get his body if they don't actually get him. I don't think he's going to survive long enough to give them any useful information. And I really believe that somebody else is involved with this in terms of finances and support and logistics. And it's not the wife and kids or anything like that. This is not a regular citizen. You have to have access to resources to make this kind of thing, especially something this high profile, work. So the other thing I just want to say, right, and I'm literally just spitballing here. Given that these were 2 very specific political figures, my question also is, if in fact someone else helped recruit, coordinate, provide resources and, a getaway plan, and would have access, I'm telling you, there's a plane involved. There is or was at some point a plane involved in the plans. The reason I say it is because if you look, Pluto's in Aquarius, and Aquarius has everything to do with airplanes and flight, right? Since Pluto has moved into Aquarius, one of the things here in the United States we've been seeing is nothing but problems with air flights, right? And planes dropping out of skies, literally like hail. Aquarius has everything to do with flight, aeronautical flight, right, or planes. So I'm convinced there's a plane involved in this plan. So in order to have a plane, you either have to live in an area where even the most common people have a plane because it's a necessity, like Alaska, for example, or you are in an area where you not in an area, but you're not only in an area which would justify having a plane, so it would be odd, but also, too, you would have the resources for it, which means you've got to have some money. So for middle class and lower middle class people, typically boats are their thing, right? Because the Trump supporters, a lot of them are middle to lower class people. So having a boat, is a big sign of status for them, right? It's the poor man's Rolls Royce. But for people who are higher than that in the socioeconomic classes, millionaires and billionaires, having your own plane is just very good for the course. It's just normal, right? And if you're in an area where you would have your own private plane and you were involved in suggesting, assisting, or supporting this type of escape plan for this person, you would also want to be in a place where having a private plane that could take off would be under the least amount of scrutiny possible as far as who's getting on and off the plane, right? So it wouldn't be somebody who owns a private plane that's in a big city because you'd have to use a local airport or hangar to get that plane, off the ground and having to store the plane. But South Dakota, they're really going after South Dakota as a suggested or possible escape direction, which now makes all kinds of sense. Because if you're in South Dakota, home of the puppy killer Chris Noam, and outlaw bikers. It's a lot of open land out there and ranches, so it's not unthinkable that somebody could have their own little mini airstrip, on their property, or whatever, because it's not very densely populated out there. And also, apparently, there's a lot of millionaires in South Dakota, right? And remember, what we have as far as toys are literally defining things as far as the class that we're in. So for middle to lower middle class people, it's boats, das Boot. Because, I don't know, I guess they'll have, past life memories of being slavers. Sorry, anyway. So there's that. And when you go higher up on the food chain, then it becomes a plane, having your own plane, right? You know, the millionaire class, right? When you become a billionaire and a trillionaire and everything else that's happening at that point, you're owning entire islands, you know, a la Zuckerberg owning pretty much 3/4 of Hawaii, you know, and all that sort of stuff. We're having like a mega super yachts like Jeff Bezos because, you know, between you and me, that's literally the middle of the ocean is the only place that man's going to get away from us if he keeps his nonsense up. And, you know, so, you know, Russian oligarchs, of course, you know, they're super yachts, you know, kind of thing. Not to mention prime real estate. Anyway, so South Dakota, millionaires, planes, private planes, and the ability to get on and off the private plane with the least amount of scrutiny possible because it's not a densely populated area makes all kinds of sense, which suggests to me that somebody helped him with this, right? It's not just him. He was being used. He was being used. But, you know, whatever. I just, yikes. Anyway, so that's that. So again, Pluto in Aquarius with the moon approaching it, he was heading for a plane, which makes South Dakota make all kinds of sense because he couldn't get across the Canadian border otherwise, you know, and he definitely can't stay. You can't stay here because everybody knows who he is. All right. So we'll see. We'll see. The FBI, the career FBI people, not the morons running it now, Kash Patel and his podcaster sidekick, dear God. But the actual career FBI people in law enforcement, like they know what they're doing. So we'll see how this goes. Now the question becomes, which way did he go? Where's Waldo? Which way did he go? Right? And in Harari, it gets a little confusing, and I'm literally just doing this, eyeballing it. So bear with me. This is a learning process for all of us. But each cardinal direction has a specific point on a chart that is indicated by, and also planets, because this is where it gets confusing, right? Even the planets and the signs are connected to specific cardinal directions, and it's not so neat and straightforward, right? And the moon also, because the moon represents lost objects and missing people, or in this case, fugitives, would also suggest a direction. And all of these things can be completely contradictory to each other. So that's why we're not all doing Harari, because it's oh my God, whew, I try to learn calculus. Okay, so with the moon and Pluto together up there in the 10th house, and the 10th house, the top of the chart, typically, because that's a Capricorn direction, the 10th house and Capricorn are together. And typically with Capricorn and the 10th house, it's due north. The cardinal direction it rules is due north. The moon is in Capricorn, which further supports this suggestion, with the moon and Pluto both being in 10th house. This is due north. So he may have been heading due north, which again suggests Canada, but he can't get into Canada because of all of the border patrol checks, unless you're going by plane. So there's that. Now, there's also, if we were going to do this, we could also look at his planetary symbol, right, which would be Venus. Because remember, Taurus on the left side of the chart represents the person taking the action, which would have been him. His chart ruler would have been Venus in the 12th house, doing things behind the scenes and undercover that you don't want other people to see or know about, which is exactly what happened. Venus is in the 12th house, and Venus in this position, 12th house, suggests an easterly direction, right? Because Aries starts the whole house wheel, and Aries is due east. So there is some suggestion that at some point he could also have been going east. See, it gets messy. And it's not unthinkable that he's going in a couple of different directions, but my best guess is that north and east or west, due north. I don't know. See, I struggle with this because I'm thinking east, he's going east, but they're heading to South Dakota, which is west, very west. So maybe he was going north and east and then going west. I don't know. But I do know planes are involved. So we'll see how that plays out. So the two possible directions, and north is definitely up, right? So the two possible directions this man is heading in is either north, almost due north and slightly, and east, due north and east, northeast, north by northeast, or he's heading due north, just straight up due north. But none of this suggests the west, which is where South Dakota is. So I'm a little confused about that. Of course, again, we're speculating. The law enforcement FBI know better. So let's follow along and see what they come up with. Okay. Okay, and to recap, including the short that I did earlier, and yes, I still look like crap because spider bite. I still say he's holed up in a house. I still say he's holed up in a house, and he's not that far. Now, the thing about it is with this particular chart, now that we have an actual time to work with, if he is in fact holed up in a house somewhere, this is not the home of people he knows. So wherever it is that he is hiding out in, these are people who didn't necessarily sign up to aid and abet a fugitive. So there is that. And I could be wrong, but we'll see. We will see. But definitely not, this is definitely not the home of people who had originally set out to assist him. And I do believe there are other people involved in here that are using him to do the dirty work for them. And the thing that Moon Mars quincunx we saw, where there's an interruption and a sudden need to recalibrate and recalculate plans, was because nobody was expecting the cops to show up at the house. So there's that. I still say he is north and east. Definitely due north and maybe slightly east is the direction he's moving in. I will stand by that. I do not understand. I mean, now that we've gone over the obvious stuff, obviously South Dakota makes sense if he's heading for a plane. But we will know better when we know his financial condition, because also too, I have a strong feeling this chart sort of supports it, but not in big ways, but it's still there. That this was not a crime of passion. This is not a crime of delusion. We're he's like these Delulu sociopaths that run around bombing clinics and everything else. Open air festivals and country music festivals, whatever. This was calculated and it was transactional, which means that there was money involved. So without confirmation, because he's not, I don't think he's driven by greed. I mean, I don't know anybody who's driven by greed so much that they would do this to strangers. People kill their spouses all the time for the insurance policy because they're driven by greed, but to kill a stranger like that, literally you don't know, for political reasons, I don't know that greed is enough of a driving force. However, financial need is another story. So, but again, law enforcement knows better his financial conditions than we do. So we'll see. So that's where we're at. I still say, so a couple of things to recap. One, he'll be caught in the next 24 to 48 hours. So it's still super fast. It wasn't the 5 to 6 hours I was expecting when we did the Harari, when I was asking him, which we said we could be off, but definitely with a new time that we had verified by the media and law enforcement at 3:35 a.m. that morning. Definitely, we're looking at him getting caught in the next 24 to 48 hours, which is good. Someone else has been assisting him with this, if not actually like coordinating all of this for him and escape routes and everything else. And he would be betrayed. And there's a strong indication that he may not live long enough to tell the tale. So, getting him quiet before he can, draw the lines back to where this original problem came from, may be on the agenda for some folks. So we'll see. We'll see. And that's it. Let's see what happens. If we are correct, we don't have a lot of time to wait. And again, if he's holed up in a house somewhere, that would also make it extremely difficult to find him because he's not moving, right? He's not out in public where you can see him. And I would think if I were a fugitive on the run and I were holed up in a house where I had all the resources I need, shelter, change of clothing, which apparently he also changed his clothes at one point during the run, which means that he had been in a house, or at least obviously near a house, enough to get a change of clothes. So if I were holed up in a physical house, which is not somebody that I knew, and I don't think there's people he knows, escaping under the cover of darkness is the only thing that makes any sense, right? You certainly don't want to go running around the streets in broad daylight with everybody looking for you. So he could easily be there for a while. We'll see. This is going to get interesting. All right. Hope you enjoyed the video. I apologize for the formatting. Again, my PowerPoint is down. I've been bitten by a non-radioactive spider. I'm not in the best mood. And of course, all that it is in the world that we're dealing with. So this is a nice diversion from
the typical angst and despair we've been feeling. All right, guys, any questions or comments? You want to have a discussion about this, put in the comment box below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And if you hear anything, absolutely put that down there too. And we'll talk to you guys later.